The gravy boat was still warm in my hands when my mother pushed back her chair and reached for her wine glass. That gesture, one slow, deliberate lift of the stem, was one I had learned to read the way meteorologists read pressure systems. Something was coming, and it had already arrived. Around the table, my aunt stopped mid-sentence. My uncle set down his fork. My brother, sitting at the far end, was already wearing that particular grin he only put on when he knew something the rest of us didn't. And beside him, his fiancée, perched in the corner chair, in a cream-colored blouse she had clearly purchased for the occasion, was pressing her lips together in the precise way people do when they are trying not to smile too soon. My mother cleared her throat. "I wanted to say something before we bring out dessert," she began. Her voice had that rehearsed quality, the cadence she used for announcements she'd been composing in the car ride over. She swept her gaze around the table, past me, I noticed, just a half-second faster than past everyone else, and settled on my brother and his fiancée with a warmth that could have powered a small municipality, because we are all gathered here on this Thanksgiving weekend. I thought it was time to do something meaningful. Something lasting. She reached behind her chair and lifted a manila envelope from the floor. "As a wedding gift," she said, her voice softening at exactly the right moment. "Your father and I are transferring the deed to the Muskoka cottage to your brother and his fiancée. It has been in this family for 32 years. Now it will carry the next generation forward." The table erupted. My aunt pressed her hand to her chest. My uncle let out a low, appreciative whistle. My brother stood from his chair as if pulled upright by a string, and his fiancée, who had been holding so still for so long, finally let the smile happen, wide and bright and entirely prepared. She covered her mouth with both hands in a display of surprised gratitude that I suspected had been practiced in a mirror at least once. I didn't move. I didn't drop the gravy boat. I didn't speak. I sat with my hands around the ceramic, feeling the heat leave it slowly, and I watched my mother pull a document from that envelope and hold it up, as if she were presenting a gift that was hers to give. My cottage. The one I had quietly rescued from power of sale 4 years ago, with $260,000, and my own name on a bank transfer. The one registered exclusively to me in the Ontario land titles system, as of October of that year, and every year since. My mother did not look at me as she passed the envelope to my brother. She did not look at me once during the applause. I set the gravy boat down. I picked up my wine. I took a slow sip and looked at his fiancée. Really looked at her. And I noticed the thing that my mother, in all her practiced generosity, had apparently missed. She wasn't looking at my brother. She was looking at the envelope. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment right now, and tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. My name is Tilda. I am 29 years old. I grew up in that house in Barrie, a 2-story semi on a quiet street north of the highway, the kind of house where everyone knew which floorboard creaked and which burner on the stove ran hot. I was the older child, the steady one, the one my parents called when something needed sorting, a tax return, a form from the government, a conversation with a bank that felt too frightening to have themselves. I am a chartered professional accountant. I specialize in forensic valuation, which means my job is to follow money through the places people prefer it not to be found. I look at financial trails the way a geologist looks at rock strata, patiently, without attachment, reading what happened by what is left behind. I work out of a firm in downtown Toronto, and I take the subway in at 7:15 most mornings, and I am very, very comfortable with documentation. I do not do drama. Drama is expensive. It costs time, clarity, and leverage. 3 things I cannot afford to give away in my professional life, and have learned, slowly, not to give away in my personal one either. So while the table celebrated and my brother's fiancée accepted congratulations she had not earned, I watched my brother's posture, the relief underneath the excitement, the way his shoulders dropped a full inch when my mother said the word transfer. I watched his fiancée's eyes move, just once, from his face to the envelope in his hands, not to him, to the envelope. A person who is surprised by a gift looks at the person who gave it. A person who has been waiting for an outcome looks at the paperwork. I excused myself to use the washroom. Standing in the upstairs hallway, I opened the Ontario Land Registry on my phone. I typed in the property address. A small lakeside property on Lake of Bays in the district of Muskoka, purchased by my parents in 1992 for $87,000, and worth considerably more today. And I waited. 3 seconds. The title record loaded. Owner of record, my full legal name. Transfer date, October 14th, 4 years prior. I put my phone in my pocket and went downstairs to have a second piece of pie. I will tell you exactly what happened 4 years ago, because it matters to everything that came after. In September of that year, I received a phone call from my mother on a Tuesday afternoon. She was using her careful voice, The one that meant something serious enough to call about, but not serious enough to admit to. She said the bank had sent a letter about the cottage. She said it was probably nothing. It was not nothing. When I drove up the 400 that Friday evening and sat down with the letter and the account statements she had been avoiding for 8 months, the picture was straightforwards. They were $37,000 behind on the cottage mortgage. The bank had issued a formal demand notice. They had 60 days to cure the default, or the bank would begin power of sale proceedings, which is the Ontario equivalent of losing the roof over everything you've told yourself you still own. My father sat across from me at that same dining room table and looked at his hands. My mother got up 3 times to make tea that no one drank. I spent that weekend on the phone with their bank manager and with a real estate lawyer from my firm. The options were limited. My parents didn't have the money in savings. Selling the cottage in that window was not realistic. The only clean path was to assume the mortgage, to formally transfer the property into my name, discharge their arrears, and take on the remaining balance myself. They agreed. My mother cried. My father shook my hand in a way he usually reserved for people he considered capable. We signed the transfer documents on a Wednesday morning in a lawyer's boardroom on Dunlop Street. I paid the land transfer tax. I registered the title with Service Ontario. I became the legal owner of a 900-square-foot A-frame on a rocky lot above Lake of Bays. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a dock that needed new decking, and a view of the water that on clear evenings looked like something out of a painting from the Group of 7. My parents continued to use it freely. I expected that. It felt right. What I did not expect was that over the following 4 years, the transfer would slowly, in my mother's memory, transform. From a rescue into a courtesy. From a legal purchase into a family favor. From my property into something that merely had my name on it for administrative reasons that no longer applied. By Thanksgiving of this year, she had apparently arrived at the conclusion that the Muskoka cottage was still, in some essential sense, the family cottage. Hers to give. Theirs to receive. The land registry told a different story. But in this family, land registries were not a language anyone else spoke. She found me in the kitchen after dessert. My aunt and uncle were in the living room, with my brother and his fiancée, examining the document my mother had produced, as though it were a museum piece. My mother came through the kitchen doorway and pulled it shut behind her with a soft click that meant the conversation was private. "You've barely said a word all evening," she said. "I talked to my uncle for 20 minutes about his garage. You know what I mean." She moved to the other side of the island, putting granite between us. When my mother wanted to have a difficult conversation, she always found something solid to stand behind. "You're upset. I have some questions about the paperwork." Her chin lifted slightly. "I thought you'd be happy for your brother." "I am. The paperwork is where I'm curious." The light above the stove was the only one on. In it, I could see her face clearly. The practiced steadiness of someone who had rehearsed this conversation too. Just not with the same preparation as me. "Your brother is getting married," she said. "He had a hard year. You know he lost that position in the spring. Things have been difficult for them." She folded her hands on the counter. "And you, look at what you have. The salary, the savings, the condo in Toronto. You have more than you need, Tilda. You have more than you will ever use." She leaned forward, her voice softening. "You're never at that cottage anyway. You went up once, this summer." "July," I said. "I was there in July. One long weekend." She pressed on. "Tilda, you didn't buy that place for yourself. You bought it to help this family. You know you did. And now that your brother needs a foundation, now that this marriage needs a foundation, the right thing, the generous thing to let it serve its purpose." There it was. The reframe. The gentle, well-practiced alchemy by which my name on a title becomes a charitable contribution to be redirected by committee. I had heard versions of this logic my entire adult life. The time she told me my student loan payments were covering the family's grocery shortfall, so I really shouldn't mind. The time she explained that my car sat in the driveway all week anyway, so it made more sense for her to use it. The accounting was always the same. What I had earned was a pool. What they needed was a withdrawal. "You're right that I bought it to help this family," I said. "But the result of that help is that I own it. Those two things are both true, and neither one cancels the other." Her expression shifted, the warmth replaced by something cooler. "Don't make this a legal argument." "I'm not making it anything. I'm describing the situation." I kept my voice even. I had learned, somewhere around my mid-20s, that steady is more effective than loud. "The property is registered in my name. It has been for 4 years. The document you pulled out tonight has no legal effect. It cannot transfer a title that isn't registered to you." She opened her mouth. I kept going. "What would matter is a transfer deed of land filed with the land titles office signed by me. I haven't signed one. I won't sign one." You would do this to your brother. I'm not doing anything to my brother. I'm describing what is real. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in a different voice, the one she used when she was genuinely reaching rather than performing, she said, his fiancé has already talked to a contractor. About the dock. About updating the kitchen. She stopped. She has plans, Tilda. She's been counting on this. I set down my glass. She had already talked to a contractor. I filed that piece of information, next to another one I had been carrying for 3 months. And for the first time, the two of them fit together in a way that made a very clear picture. In July, on the long weekend my mother had just dismissed, I had driven up to the cottage alone. I was on the porch with a coffee and my laptop on the Saturday morning when a notification appeared in my inbox. I had been copied, apparently by mistake, a CC that should have been a BCC, on an email from a private lending company based in Mississauga. The email was addressed to my brother's fiancée. It was a follow-up request for additional documentation on a business loan application. In the visible details of the email thread, under the heading, as assets identified as collateral, 2 properties were listed. The first was my parents' house in Barrie. The second was the Muskoka Cottage. I read it twice. I set my coffee down. I looked at the lake for a while, because sometimes that is the most productive thing you can do with a piece of information, before you decide what to do with it. The loan amount was $140,000. The business described in the application was a wellness consulting practice that, from what I had observed over 2 years of family gatherings, had not yet produced visible revenue. I did 2 things. First, I emailed the lending company directly, identified myself as the registered owner of the Muskoka property, and noted in plain terms that I had not authorized its use as collateral for any loan application, and that the title records would confirm my ownership. They responded within 48 hours, thanked me, and told me the file had been flagged. Second, I called a colleague, who works in financial fraud assessment, and described the situation without naming names. He confirmed what I already understood. Listing an asset you do not own as loan collateral in a financing application is misrepresentation. Depending on circumstances, it can rise to the level of fraud under the Criminal Code, and is taken seriously by the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. I saved the email chain. I printed the land registry search. I put them both in a folder and filed it in my desk drawer. I had told myself at the time that it was likely an honest mistake. That she had misunderstood what she was permitted to list. That people make errors in financial applications all the time, especially when they are anxious about money and not thinking clearly. But people who make honest mistakes do not also arrange contractors. Standing in my mother's kitchen that Thanksgiving evening, hearing the word contractor fall out of the conversation like something that was supposed to stay hidden, I felt the pieces click into place the way figures do at the end of a valuation. Not with drama, but with the particular quiet of a number that has finally balanced. I said goodnight to my aunt and uncle. I hugged my brother, who looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between gratitude and guilt, which is a combination I have seen before on people who are not yet sure how much they know. I got in my car and drove back down the 400 to Toronto in the dark. I called the private lender's compliance contact the next morning from my office. She remembered me from the July correspondence. I asked for an update on the file status. She told me the application had been suspended. She told me the matter had been referred to the FSRA. She told me that as the registered property owner, I might be contacted to provide a formal statement. I thanked her. I ended the call. I sat for a moment at my desk, looking at the city through the window. The gray October light on the buildings, the CN Tower visible between the towers to the south, and I thought about what I was going to do next. That evening, I called my brother. He picked up on the 3rd ring, sounding wary before I said a word. That was telling on its own. I need to talk to you about the cottage, I said. Tilda. I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling because there are things you should know before this situation goes any further. I paused. Things about the loan application. Silence. The specific silence of someone who is deciding how much to pretend not to understand. What loan, he said, not quite a question. The business loan application your fiancé submitted to a private lender in June, I said. The one that listed the Muskoka cottage as collateral. My cottage. My name on the title, which I could pull up for you right now on Service Ontario if you'd like. The silence that followed was longer. She said it was a family asset, he said finally. His voice was careful, quieter than before. It is not a family asset. It is my property registered to me, which she listed in a financing application without my knowledge or authorization. The lender has suspended the file. The FSRA has been notified. There is an open review. He didn't speak. I'm not calling to threaten you, I said. And I meant it entirely. I'm calling because I think you deserve to know what is actually happening. And because I need you to understand that what happened at Thanksgiving, the announcement, the envelope, none of it changes the legal reality. The cottage is mine. It has always been mine since the transfer, and this needs to stop before it becomes something that follows both of you for a long time. When he finally responded, his voice had changed. The careful quality was gone. What replaced it was something smaller, younger. I didn't know about the loan application, he said. I didn't know she put the cottage on it. She told me she was listing family assets. I thought she meant. He stopped. I didn't know. I believed him. And believing him didn't change what needed to happen. Then I'm sorry, I said, but you still need to talk to her. And to our mother. They came to Toronto 3 days later, on a Thursday evening. My mother and my brother arrived together, without calling ahead, which told me they had spent the drive from Barrie arguing and had not finished. My mother's hair was less composed than usual. My brother had the expression of a man who has rehearsed his argument so many times, it has stopped feeling real. His fiancée was not with them. I brought them up to the residence lounge off my building lobby, a room nobody ever used, with low chairs and a dying plant in the corner. Neutral ground. No good crockery, no performance. My mother opened with the observation that I had overreacted. I opened the folder on the coffee table. The land registry search, current as of this week, I said, sliding it across. My name, the property address, the transfer date. 4 years ago, you both signed the transfer documents. They were notarized. They were filed. This is not a technicality. This is the title. I slid the second document across. This is the email chain from the lender, his fiancée's application, the collateral section, where our cottage is listed. And then the third. This is the lender's written response to my objection, confirming the file has been suspended and referred to the FSRA. My mother looked at the papers. She did not pick them up. My brother did. He picked up the email chain and read it slowly. I watched his face move through several things. Disbelief, recognition, and then something that had no easy name. The specific look of a person who has been used without knowing it, and is only now understanding the full shape of what happened. He set the paper down. I told her not to put anything on that application that we didn't own, he said. His voice was quiet. She said she understood the difference. My mother said, maybe there was a miscommunication. There wasn't, my brother said. And that was the moment I knew the conversation was already over. We sat for a few minutes longer, but the architecture of the argument had already collapsed. My mother tried twice more, once with the vocabulary of fairness, once with the vocabulary of family. But the documents on the table had a different kind of authority than anything she could produce, and she knew it. I gathered the papers and put them back in the folder. I'm not going to file a formal complaint, I said. That is not what I am here for. But the fiction that this property is available for redistribution, that ends here. I need that to be clear to everyone in this room. My mother looked at me for a long moment. She opened her mouth and then, for perhaps the first time in my adult memory, she closed it again without speaking. My brother looked at his hands. I stood up. I'll give you some time. The front desk can call you a cab when you're ready. I went back up to my apartment. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen window and watched the street below. The orange light on wet pavement, a woman walking a dog that had stopped to investigate something in the gutter, with complete seriousness. My phone buzzed. My brother's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. I would listen to it eventually. Tomorrow, or the day after. I would decide, in my own time and on my own terms, what kind of relationship I wanted with each of these people going forward, if any. I had learned, slowly and at some cost, that blood is not a binding contract, that proximity to someone is not the same as being loved by them, that a family which treats your hard work as a communal resource to be allocated by committee is not, in any functional sense, actually concerned with your welfare. It is an extractive arrangement, dressed up in holiday tablecloths and good intentions. I had spent 29 years being the one who stabilized things quietly, who made the calls and signed the papers and covered the gaps and then graciously stepped back, so no one felt indebted. I had done it. Because that was how love was expressed in the language I had been raised in. But I was old enough now to recognize that the language had been designed to keep me from asking for anything in return. I deleted my mother's number. I sent my brother a short text. I need some time. I'll reach out when I'm ready. I blocked his fiancée's number without reading her message, which I could see from the preview began with the words, I just want you to know, I never meant to. I didn't need to know what she never meant to do. I needed to know what she did. Outside my window, the woman and her dog had moved on. The street was doing what streets do in October in Toronto, absorbing the cold, holding the light from the lampposts in the puddles, carrying on. I wasn't angry. That surprised me, slightly. I had expected to feel angry. What I actually felt was something quieter and more specific. The relief that comes when you stop holding a door open for someone who has never once walked through it the right way. I thought about the cottage, the screened porch, the way the lake looked in November when the other properties had all closed for the season, and the water went dark, and the birch trees stood bare and white against the gray sky. The mornings in the off-season had a particular quality of silence that I had always found difficult to describe, not empty but full of something that didn't require anything from me. I would go up in a few weeks. I would bring my thermos and a stack of books, and I would sit on the dock in my coat and watch the water, and not think about any of this. For the first time, I wouldn't be calculating who else might need that space. I wouldn't be keeping it in reserve. I wouldn't be holding it lightly, the way you all hold something that you suspect might be taken. It was mine. It had always been mine, and now, finally, I was going to let myself live like that was true.